The rhythmic, sterile hum of the floor buffer was the only sound in the penthouse at 3:12 a.m., a soothing vibration that usually promised Sierra Jones a night of peace. But as she rounded the corner of the mahogany desk, the machine hit something thick. It wasn't floor wax. It was a visceral, metallic-smelling puddle of crimson spreading across the Italian marble like a dark ink stain. Sierra looked up, her breath hitching. Slumped against a shattered floor-to-ceiling window was Alexander Fagus, the American king of the criminal underworld. He was dying, his custom suit shredded, clutching 2 infant car seats to his chest as if they were his only anchors to the world. He leveled a trembling Glock 17 at her heart, his eyes blown wide with shock and agony. Sierra didn't scream. She had spent her life erasing the messes of powerful men. Between her double shifts to pay for her grandmother's memory care and her own history as a foster child who survived by being invisible, she knew the mathematics of survival. She saw the blood, she saw the babies, and she made a choice. She wasn't just going to clean the room, she was going to save the man the world thought was a monster. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. In a world of blood and betrayal, the cleanest hands are often the ones that have seen the most dirt. Watch Sierra Jones transform from an invisible cleaner to the powerhouse behind the throne. Subscribe and hit the bell to follow the saga of The Cleaner and the Mafia King, new chapters daily. The industrial-strength scent of lemon-scented bleach usually acted as Sierra's sanctuary. It was the scent of a job well done, the smell of a world returned to its proper, sterile order. But tonight, in the penthouse of the Fagus Tower, the lemon was losing its war against the thick, copper stench of fresh blood. Sierra stood at the threshold of the executive suite, her specialized cleaning cart, a heavy, rattling beast of chrome and plastic, parked just outside the door. She had been hired for a post-event deep clean, a phrase she knew usually meant cleaning up spilled champagne and hors d'oeuvres from a corporate gala. But as she stepped onto the Italian marble, her boots didn't click, they squelched. Alexander Fagus was slumped against the mahogany desk, his custom-tailored suit shredded and soaked. In his left hand, he held a Glock 17 with a trembling grip. In his right, he was white-knuckling the handles of 2 infant car seats. The twins, Leo and Mia, were eerily silent, their wide eyes reflecting the flashing red emergency lights of the building. "Don't," Alexander rasped, the word catching on a bubble of blood in his throat. His eyes were unfocused, the pupils blown wide with shock. "One step closer and I'll..." "You'll miss," Sierra interrupted, her voice surprisingly steady. She didn't look at the gun, she looked at the tactical carrier strapped to his chest. "You're in shock, your blood pressure is plummeting, and you're bleeding out from a brachial artery nick. If you fire that gun, the recoil will probably finish the job for you. You'll drop those babies, and I'll be the last thing you ever see. Is that how you want this to end?" She didn't wait for his permission. This was her world. People thought cleaners were servants, but in a room full of chaos, the person with the mop was the only one with a plan. Sierra reached into her heavy-duty cleaning cart, bypassing the window cleaner and the floor wax. She pulled out her emergency trauma kit, a habit from growing up in neighborhoods where the police took 30 minutes to arrive, but the cleaners were expected in 10. "I'm a cleaner," she whispered, kneeling in the pool of red that was ruining her freshly waxed floor. "And right now, Alexander, you're the biggest mess in this room." She began to work with a clinical, detached efficiency. She ripped open a pack of hemostatic gauze. The twins started to fuss, a low, rhythmic whimpering that set Sierra's teeth on edge. In her world, noise was a death sentence. "Hold them," she commanded, her voice a sharp whip. "If they cry, we both die. Your cousin's men are already in the lobby. I heard their radios when I came up the service lift." As she packed the wound, Alexander let out a choked groan, his knuckles turning ivory as he squeezed the car seat handles. Sierra didn't flinch. She watched the hallway through the gap under the door. She saw the shadows of 3 men stop. The doorknob rattled. "It's locked," a muffled voice said from the hall. "Check the service stairs. No one leaves this floor alive. Victor wants the king's head and the heirs in a bag." Sierra tied a makeshift tourniquet using a strip of high-density microfiber cloth. It was a neon blue strip of fabric, a ridiculous contrast against the dark Italian wool of his suit. She looked at Alexander, seeing the American king reduced to a desperate father. For a fleeting second, her cold exterior cracked. She saw the terror in his eyes, not for his empire, but for the 2 small heartbeats he held in his hands. "We have 2 minutes before they realize I'm the only one with a key to the service elevator," Sierra said, grabbing her cart and throwing a heavy, blood-soaked rug over the puddle to mask the scent. "Can you stand, or do I have to drag you and the kids through the trash chute?" Alexander looked at the twins, then at the girl with the bleach-stained apron and the steady hands. He nodded once, the gun finally lowering. "Why are you helping me? You know who I am. You know what happens to people who interfere with Fagus business." "Because," Sierra said, hauling him toward the hidden wall panel behind the desk, "I hate leaving a job unfinished. And this floor is still filthy. I'm not leaving until it's spotless, and that includes you." The bowels of Manhattan were Sierra's true kingdom. While the elite of the Fagus family moved in armored escalades and private jets, Sierra moved through the veins of the city, the steam tunnels, the freight elevators, and the trash chutes that smelled of discarded secrets. As they moved through the maintenance crawlspace, the heat was stifling. Alexander stumbled, his breath coming in ragged hitches. The weight of the twins, combined with his blood loss, was dragging him toward the concrete floor. "The freight elevator is compromised," Sierra whispered, checking her phone. A specialized app she'd rigged, one that monitored the building's internal circuitry, showed the building's power consumption spiking. "They've cut the main lines to the passenger elevators. They're trying to box us in. They think we're trapped on the 40th floor. They know the layout," Alexander managed to say, leaning heavily against a vibrating steam pipe that hissed with the pressure of 1,000 offices. "My cousin. Victor, he helped design the security upgrade last year. He knows every camera, every sensor. He designed the security for people who use the front door," Sierra retorted. She reached the end of the crawlspace and kicked open a rusted grate that led to a secondary trash compactor. "He didn't design it for the woman who has to haul 400 pounds of medical waste and shredded documents out of here every night. He doesn't see the people who empty the bins, Alexander. That's his first mistake. My father taught me that the most dangerous person is the one you don't bother to look at." She ushered him into a specialized disposal lift, a small, vibrating platform used for transporting hazardous chemical waste. It was cramped. Alexander's tall, athletic frame was forced to hunch over, his knees brushing against Sierra's jugs of ammonia and industrial degreaser. The twins finally began to cry in earnest, the high-pitched wails echoing off the metal walls of the lift. Sierra reached into her pocket and pulled out 2 sterile pacifiers she kept in a vacuum-sealed plastic bag, another remnant of her hyper-prepared nature. She handed them to Alexander. "They're hungry," Alexander noted, his voice softening as he watched Mia take the pacifier. The ruthless boss of the American Mafia was now gently rocking a plastic car seat in a garbage lift. "I was supposed to have a bag. Formula, diapers, a life that didn't involve bleeding out in a closet. My security team, they were all killed in the first 30 seconds. My own men turned their guns on me. We're going to my territory," Sierra said as the lift began its slow, grinding descent into the basement level. "Somewhere Victor's cameras don't reach. Somewhere the invisible live." The lift hit the bottom with a jarring thud. They emerged into a damp, dimly lit sub-basement that connected to the 42nd Street subway tunnels. This was a labyrinth of forgotten infrastructure, where the air tasted like ozone and old wet stone. Sierra didn't head for the tracks where the trains roared. Instead, she led him toward a heavy steel door marked danger, high voltage. She swiped a black keycard that didn't have a logo or a name. The door hissed open, revealing a small, hidden alcove filled with extra uniforms, industrial solvents, and a small cot. It was a glitch in the building's blueprints, a room that technically didn't exist. "This is a dead zone," Sierra explained, helping him sit on the cot. She immediately began stripping off his ruined jacket. "No GPS, no cellular, no thermal. We stay here for an hour. I need to make sure your father hasn't put a deep clean order on this sector yet." Alexander looked up, his brow furrowing through the pain. "How do you know about deep clean orders?" "That's Fagus terminology. That's a code for total erasure." Sierra paused, her hand hovering over a bottle of saline. She didn't look at him. The flickering fluorescent light cast long, jagged shadows across her face. "Because my father is the one who wrote the manual on how to dispose of people like you, Mr. Fagus. My name is Sierra Jones. My father is Elias, the Fixer Jones. I grew up watching him make people like you disappear into buckets of lye." The silence in the room was heavier than the miles of concrete above them. Alexander's hand moved instinctively toward his gun, his instinct screaming that he was in the hands of the enemy. But as he looked at Sierra, at her tired eyes and the way she gently adjusted the blanket over the twins, his hand relaxed. "If you were going to kill me," he whispered, "you would have done it in the penthouse." "I don't kill," Sierra said, finally meeting his gaze. "I clean. And right now, the world is a very messy place." By 5 a.m., the adrenaline had faded, replaced by the bone-deep cold of a New York winter. Sierra knew they couldn't stay in the sub-basement. If her father was involved, he would eventually check the dead zones. Elias Jones was a man of infinite patience and a memory like a steel trap. He knew his daughter's habits better than she knew them herself. "We need to move," she said, watching Alexander as he tried to feed Leo a bottle of water mixed with a bit of sugar, a desperate, temporary solution. "I have a place. A laundromat in Queens. It's registered under a shell company for a dry cleaning chain that went bust in the 90s. Not even my father knows I own the deed." They moved through the early morning fog, blending into the crowd of pre-dawn commuters. Alexander wore a jagged, oversized janitor's jacket Sierra had forced him into, the city sanitation logo peeling off the back. His face was hidden by a low-hanging cap, his expensive shoes covered in plastic boot covers to hide the bloodstains. The twins were tucked into a double stroller Sierra had retrieved from a lost and found bin in the building's basement. To the world, they looked like just another tired couple after a long, soul-crushing night shift. In reality, they were the most hunted people in the tri-state area. Every black SUV that passed felt like a predator. The laundromat, the pristine press, was a 24-hour operation in a neighborhood that never slept. The smell of high-end detergent and the hum of industrial dryers offered a false sense of security. Sierra led them to the back office, room reinforced with soundproof padding and a heavy steel deadbolt she'd installed herself. "Sit," she commanded, pointing to a plastic chair near a stack of folded towels. She began the deep clean of Alexander. She stripped him of the bloody shirt and began properly stitching the wound. Her hands were like machines, steady, rhythmic, and cold. As she worked, she watched him. He wasn't the monster the tabloids described. He didn't look like a Don. He looked like a man terrified that he would fail the two infants sleeping in the stroller. "You're good at this," Alexander whispered, his eyes fluttering as the local anesthetic took hold. "Too good for someone who just mops floors." "I was going to be a surgeon," Sierra said, her voice flat, devoid of the old pain. "I had the grades. I had the passion. Then my father decided I'd be more useful in the family business. He told me that doctors save lives, but cleaners save reputations. When I refused to pull a trigger, he told me I'd spend the rest of my life scrubbing the floors of the people who did. He thought it would break me. He didn't realize it just taught me where everyone hides their dirt. Alexander looked at the twins, then back at her. You saved us. That makes you an enemy of the Fagus family. You know that, don't you? There is no cleaning your way out of this. I've been an enemy of the state since I was 6 years old and hid my father's burner phones in the toy box, Sierra replied, snipping the surgical thread with a pair of sterile scissors. Suddenly, the bell at the front of the laundromat chimed. A man in a dark, expensive wool coat walked in. He didn't have any laundry. He didn't look at the machines. He walked straight to the out-of-order dryer in the corner, the one Sierra used as a drop box for her private contracts. Sierra froze, her hand gripping the medical tray. Through the tinted glass of the office door, she saw the man pull a small, laminated card from the dryer's lint trap. It's a signal, Sierra breathed, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She checked her own phone, which had been silent for hours. A message appeared from an unknown, encrypted number. The mess isn't gone, Sierra. It's just spreading. You have the king. You have the heirs. Finish the job, or the old woman in the St. Jude's care home gets the bleach treatment next. You have 3 hours to clear the stain. It was her father. He wasn't just tracking her, he was giving her an ultimatum. Kill Alexander Fagus and the children, or watch her grandmother, the only person who ever loved her, be cleaned out of existence. Alexander saw the look on her face. He reached for his Glock, the metal cold and heavy. But Sierra put her hand over his. Her touch was ice cold. Don't, she said, looking him in the eye. He wants a mess. He expects me to panic. He expects me to be the daughter he raised. But he forgot one thing. What's that? Alexander asked. He taught me how to remove any stain, Sierra said, a dark, dangerous light appearing in her eyes. And tonight, I'm going to give him a masterpiece. I will continue the narrative following the 10-chapter outline we established. To ensure each chapter reaches the depth and detail required, aiming for the high word count per section, I will focus on the intricate details of the invisible world Sierra inhabits and the evolving tension between her and Alexander. The air in the laundromat was thick with the cloying scent of cheap dryer sheets and the underlying metallic tang of Alexander's blood. Sierra stood by the window, peeking through a crack in the closed sign. The man in the expensive wool coat was gone, but the card he had left in the out-of-order dryer remained. It was a calling card from her father, a physical manifestation of a ghost she had spent 5 years trying to outrun. Who is he? Alexander asked, his voice stronger now that the hemostatic gauze had done its work. He was sitting on the edge of the plastic chair, the oversized janitor's jacket hanging off his broad shoulders. He looked less like a king and more like a predator in a cage. Elias Jones, Sierra said without turning around. The man the 5 families call when they want a body to turn into vapor. He doesn't just kill people, Alexander. He erases them. He's the reason there are so many unsolved disappearances in this city. He's a ghost who manages other ghosts. She walked over to the dryer and retrieved the card. It wasn't paper, it was a thin slice of black PVC with a single embossed coordinate. He's tracking my employee ID, Sierra realized, her voice dropping to a whisper. He knew I was assigned to your penthouse. He didn't just let me go there, he sent me. He wanted a cleaner on-site who wouldn't call the police. He wanted his own daughter to dispose of the American king, so he could claim the bounty from your cousin Victor. Alexander's eyes darkened. He's using you as a disposal unit for your own father's hits. It's efficient, Sierra said, her jaw tightening. He knows I'm a perfectionist. He knows I can't stand a mess. He calculated that my instinct to hide a body would override my morality. But he didn't count on the twins. She looked at Leo and Mia, who were stir-stirring in the stroller. The stakes had shifted. This wasn't just about a mob hit anymore, it was about the legacy of a man she had never met, her father, colliding with the survival of two innocents. He threatened my grandmother, Sierra continued, her hand trembling slightly as she held the card. She's in a memory care facility in Queens. She's the only reason I still work for the agencies he controls. If I don't deliver you to him in 3 hours, he'll have her moved to a private clinic where no one ever comes out. Alexander stood up, moving with a grimace as the stitches pulled. He walked over to her, his height towering over her, but his expression was one of unexpected empathy. I've spent my life making choices based on blood, Sierra. Usually, it's the blood I've spilled. But for these two, he gestured to the twins, I'd burn this entire city to the ground. Your father is a fixer. He plays a game of logic. We need to play a game of chaos. I don't do chaos, Sierra snapped. Chaos is messy. Chaos leaves evidence. Then show me how the invisible woman fights, Alexander challenged. Sierra looked at the coordinate on the card. It pointed to a pier in Long Island City. A classic execution spot. She looked at her cleaning supplies, the ammonia, the bleach, the industrial-grade degreasers. She looked at the man who was supposed to be her victim. We aren't going to the pier, Sierra said, her voice turning cold and clinical. We're going to the one place my father never looks, the center of his own web. To get from Queens back into the heart of the city without being seen by the thousands of eyes her father controlled, they had to go underground. Not the subway platforms where tourists took photos, but the in negative space, the maintenance tunnels and abandoned stations that had been sealed since the 1970s. Sierra led Alexander and the twins through a rusted access door behind a dumpster. They carried the babies in tactical slings now, the stroller abandoned in the laundromat as a decoy. Watch your step, Sierra cautioned, her flashlight cutting through the thick, humid darkness. The third rail is live 3 feet to your left, and the water on the floor is mostly runoff from the chemical plants. Don't let it touch your skin. The sound of the city above was a dull, rhythmic thud. Down here, the world was silent except for the scuttling of rats and the distant drip of pipes. They had been walking for 20 minutes when Sierra stopped abruptly. She turned off her light. What is it? Alexander hissed, his hand going to his holster. Vibration, Sierra whispered. Someone is using the service railcart. My father's men. They aren't looking for us with flashlights, they're using thermal imaging. She grabbed a bottle of pressurized coolant from her bag, a chemical she used to flash freeze gum off of marble floors. The thermal will pick up your body heat like a beacon. We need to disappear. She began spraying the walls and the floor around them, the liquid nitrogen-based coolant creating a localized fog of extreme cold. Get down. Cover the babies' faces. A moment later, a low, mechanical hum filled the tunnel. A small motorized platform glided past, manned by 2 men in tactical gear. They were holding tablets, their faces lit by the blue glow of thermal scans. They passed within 5 feet of the alcove where Sierra and Alexander were crouched. Thanks to the coolant, they appeared as nothing more than cold, inanimate shadows on the sensors. As the hum faded, Alexander exhaled. You're a ghost, Sierra. Truly. I've had a lot of practice, she said, her voice strained. But the fog won't last. We have to reach the 42nd Street junction. There's a ventilation shaft that leads directly under the Fagus corporate offices. My father has an auxiliary office there. He thinks he's safe because he's surrounded by your cousin's security. He thinks I'm dead, Alexander noted. Or that you're currently killing me. Exactly, Sierra said. He's waiting for a confirmation. We're going to give him a confrontation. As they reached the junction, a sudden flash of light blinded them. A secondary hit squad, tipped off by a motion sensor Sierra hadn't accounted for, opened fire. The bullets sparked against the steel beams. Sierra didn't scream. She didn't panic. She reached into her vest and pulled out 2 glass jars filled with a volatile mixture of ammonia and chlorine gas, a masterpiece of cleaning gone horribly wrong. "Close your eyes and hold your breath," she yelled, smashing the jars against the tunnel floor. A thick, yellowish cloud erupted instantly. The assassins began coughing violently, their eyes burning as the toxic gas filled the narrow space. In the confusion, Sierra pulled Alexander through a heavy iron gate, locking it behind them. "That was a war crime," Alexander coughed, rubbing his eyes. "That was a deep clean," Sierra corrected. "Now move. We're running out of time." The auxiliary office was hidden behind a false wall in the Fagus Tower's basement laundry facility. It was a masterpiece of irony. The man who erased people worked in the room where the city's dirtiest linens were washed. Sierra entered first, her cleaning uniform acting as a perfect disguise. The guards at the door barely glanced at her. She was just the woman coming to replace the floor mats. Alexander followed in the shadows, moving with the silent lethality of a wounded wolf. Elias Jones sat behind a desk made of reclaimed industrial steel. He was an older version of Sierra, sharp features, cold eyes, and hands that never stayed still. He was looking at a monitor showing the Long Island City Pier. "You're late, Sierra," Elias said, not looking up. "The client is getting restless." "Did you have trouble with the infants?" "I told you, a little sedative in the milk makes the disposal much quieter." "The infants are fine, Dad," Sierra said, stepping into the light. Elias froze. He slowly turned his head, his eyes widening as he saw Alexander Fagus standing behind his daughter, a gun aimed directly at his heart. "Sierra," Elias said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. "What have you done?" "I finished the job," Sierra said, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and relief. "But not the one you gave me. I'm cleaning up the family business, Elias. Starting with you. You think this man will protect you?" Elias sneered, gesturing to Alexander. "He's a Fagus. As soon as he regains his throne, you'll be nothing more than a witness he needs to silence. You're trading a father who loves you for a king who will discard you." "You don't love me," Sierra spat. "You used me. You used my grandmother. You turned my life into a series of crime scenes." Alexander stepped forward, the barrel of the gun inches from Elias's forehead. "Your daughter saved my heirs, Jones. In my world, that makes her more than a witness. That makes her untouchable." Elias laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Untouchable? In this city? Victor has already moved the council. The vote happens in 1 hour at the gala. By midnight, Alexander Fagus will be a ghost, and the twins will be tragedies of the coup. You're holding a gun at a man who has already won. Then we'll just have to change the ending," Sierra said. She reached across the desk and grabbed her father's master keycard, the one that bypassed every lock in the Fagus Empire. "Sierra, if you walk out that door with him, there is no coming back," Elias warned. "I know," Sierra said, looking at the man who had raised her to be invisible. "For the first time in my life, I want everyone to see me." She looked at Alexander. "The gala is on the top floor. We have 45 minutes to turn this building into a crime scene that even my father can't clean up." The ventilation shaft was a narrow, vertical coffin of galvanized steel that smelled of dust and old grease. Sierra climbed first, her boots finding purchase on the rungs with the muscle memory of a woman who had spent years maintaining the things the world ignored. Below her, Alexander climbed with one arm, the other keeping the tactical sling tight against his chest where the twins were now, mercifully, asleep. They emerged into a secondary mechanical room on the 32nd floor. It was a forest of HVAC units and water heaters. Sierra immediately dropped to the floor, pulling a small electronic scanner from her utility belt to sweep for bugs. "We have 10 minutes before my father realizes his master keycard has been used to access this level," Sierra whispered. She turned to Alexander, who was leaning against a massive boiler, his face pale and slick with sweat. He reached into his shirt and pulled out a heavy silver locket, the metal dented and stained with dried blood. He flicked it open with a thumb. Inside wasn't a picture of a wife or a lover, but a micro SD chip and a lock of dark hair. "My sister, Elena," Alexander said, his voice thick with a grief he usually kept buried under layers of stone. "She was the heart of this family. Victor killed her because she found out he was skimming from the union funds to build his own private militia. He didn't just want the throne, he wanted to turn the Fagus legacy into a butcher shop." Sierra watched him, her hand hovering over the saline bottle. "The twins, they aren't yours, are they?" "They are hers," Alexander admitted, his eyes softening as he looked down at the bundles on his chest. "Victor was going to dispose of them as loose ends. I took them and ran. I let the world believe I was the ruthless boss fleeing a coup, but I was just a brother trying to save the only pieces of my sister left on this earth. The council doesn't know. They think I'm protecting my own heirs." Sierra felt a sharp, unfamiliar pang in her chest. She had spent her life believing that men like Alexander and her father were the same, monsters who viewed people as assets or liabilities. But here was the American king, risking everything for children that weren't even his own. "The chip," Sierra said, pointing to the locket. "What's on it?" "The ledger," Alexander replied. "The proof that Victor has been selling out our family's territories to the cartel. If the council sees this, they won't just strip him of his rank, they'll erase him. But I can't get close enough to the high table to play it. Victor has snipers on the mezzanine." Sierra took the locket from his hand. Her fingers brushed his, and for a second, the coldness of the room vanished. "They won't see me coming, Alexander. I'm the help. I'm the one who changes the water pitchers and wipes the crumbs off the table. Give me the chip. I'll get it into the system." "Sierra, if they catch you, they won't just kill you," Alexander warned, his grip tightening on her hand. "They'll make an example of you." "Let them try," Sierra said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "I've been invisible my whole life. It's time I used it to take out the trash." The transition from the grimy mechanical rooms to the opulence of the 40th floor was jarring. The air changed from industrial oil to expensive lilies and French perfume. Sierra stood in the service corridor, wearing a crisp, white catering uniform she had borrowed from a locker. She carried a tray of crystal glasses, her head bowed just enough to avoid the direct gaze of the security guards. Through the double doors, the Fagus estate gala was in full swing. It was a room full of sharks in tuxedos. In the center of the room sat the High Council, 5 men who decided the fate of the city's underworld. Victor was at the head of the table, holding a glass of scotch and wearing the smug expression of a man who thought the crown was already his. "Water service," Sierra murmured as she approached the tech booth near the back of the hall. The technician, a young man distracted by the high-resolution monitors, didn't even look at her. "Just put it on the side table, sweetheart." Sierra moved with the precision of a ghost. As she set the tray down, her hand dipped into her pocket. She slid the micro SD chip into the main server's bypass port, a port she knew existed because she was the one who had to vacuum the dust out of it every month. On the screen, a progress bar began to crawl. 20%. 40%. Suddenly, the doors at the back of the hall burst open. It wasn't Alexander. It was her father, Elias. He looked manic, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on her. "There!" Elias shouted, pointing a finger at Sierra. "The cleaner. She's compromised the system." The music stopped. The sharks turned. Victor stood up, his face contorting into a mask of fury. "Seize her. And find Fagus. He's in the building." Sierra didn't run. She stood her ground as 2 guards lunged for her. She grabbed a heavy glass carafe from her tray and smashed it against the side of the first guard's head. As the second guard reached for his holster, she kicked the tech table over, sending monitors crashing to the floor and creating a barrier of tangled wires and broken glass. The data is already in the stream, Victor. Sierra yelled over the chaos. High above, on the mezzanine, the massive projector screens flickered to life. Instead of the Fagus family crest, the screens began scrolling through the union ledgers, the cartel contracts, and the video footage of Elena's final moments. The room went deathly silent. The council members turned their gaze toward Victor, their expressions shifting from loyalty to lethal judgment. It's a lie. Victor screamed, his voice cracking. Elias, kill her. Now. Elias pulled his suppressed pistol, aiming it at his daughter's heart. But before he could pull the trigger, a shadow dropped from the ceiling rafters. Alexander Fagus landed on the center table, glass shattering under his boots. He held a gun in each hand, his eyes burning with a righteous, terrifying fire. The cleaning service has arrived, Victor, Alexander roared. And we're starting with the head of the table. The ballroom erupted into a symphony of gunfire and breaking crystal. Guests scrambled for the exits, but Sierra had already used her master key to trigger the emergency lockdown. The heavy steel shutters slammed down over the windows and doors, sealing the predators inside with their prey. Sierra dove behind the bar, grabbing a pressurized CO2 canister used for the soda fountain. She saw her father moving through the crowd, his eyes fixed on her with a terrifying, singular focus. He wasn't trying to escape, he was trying to finish his contract. Sierra. Elias yelled over the roar of the crowd. You ruined everything. We could have been the most powerful duo in the city. I gave you the skills to be a god, and you chose to be a servant. I chose to be human. Sierra shouted back. She twisted the valve on the CO2 canister and threw it toward the center of the room. The canister exploded in a white cloud of freezing gas, creating an instant smokescreen. Through the haze, she saw Alexander moving like a wraith, taking down Victor's guards with surgical precision. He was protecting the flank of the room where the twins were hidden in a secure service closet. Sierra moved through the fog, her knowledge of the room's layout giving her the advantage. She found her father near the server rack, his gun raised. Goodbye, Sierra, Elias whispered. But Sierra was faster. She didn't use a gun. She used a high-tensile steel cable, the kind used for hauling heavy industrial floor buffers. She looped it around her father's wrists and kicked his feet out from under him. As he fell, she used a pulley system on the wall to hoist him upward, pinning him against a marble pillar. The mess is contained, Elias, she said, her voice cold and final. In the center of the room, Alexander had Victor pinned against the high table. The council members stood back, their silence a clear indication that Victor was now a liability. For Elena, Alexander said, his voice a low growl. He didn't pull the trigger. He didn't have to. The council's lead enforcer stepped forward and placed a hand on Victor's shoulder, the universal sign of a death sentence in the Fagus world. The coup was over. The stain had been scrubbed clean. 1 month later. The Fagus Tower had been scrubbed of every trace of the gala's violence. The marble was polished, the glass replaced, and the scent of gunpowder had been replaced by the familiar, sharp tang of Sierra's lemon bleach. Alexander sat in the high-back chair in the penthouse, but the room looked different. There were toys on the rug. A playpen sat near the window. The twins, Leo and Mia, were healthy and loud, their laughter echoing through the halls of power. Sierra stood by the window, her cleaning cart parked nearby. She wasn't wearing a uniform anymore. She wore a tailored black suit that fit her like armor. The council has accepted the new terms, Alexander said, looking at her with a respect that bordered on awe. No more cartel contracts. No more disposals. We're moving the assets into legitimate logistics and urban development. We're becoming the people who build the city, not the ones who hide its bodies. And my father? Sierra asked. He's in a private facility, Alexander said. The kind he used to send people to. He'll never see the sun again, but he'll be fed and cared for. It's more than he gave your grandmother. Sierra nodded. Her grandmother was now in the best medical suite in the country, surrounded by doctors who actually knew her name. The agency called, Sierra said, a small smirk playing on her lips. They have a deep clean contract for a warehouse in Brooklyn. Apparently, some mess was left behind during a transition of power. Alexander stood up and walked over to her. He took her hand, his fingers interlaced with hers. Tell them the position is filled. Permanently. Oh? Sierra asked. And who's the new cleaner? Alexander pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. We are. We're going to clean this city from the top down, Sierra. Together. Outside, the New York skyline glittered in the crisp winter air. The city was still full of secrets, still full of grime and shadows. But for the first time in her life, Sierra Jones wasn't hiding from the mess. She was the one who decided what stayed and what was erased. The invisible woman had finally found her light. And the American king had finally found his queen. The end.